Welcome to Working Progress. This is the podcast where we dive into strategies for success and journey towards progress. In today's episode, we are joined by Andy Molinsky, professor of organizational behavior and international management at Brandeis University and author of Global Dexterity, How to Adapt Your Behavior Across Cultures Without Losing Yourself in the Process. We're exploring a powerful topic today, leading authentically in an uncertain world. Andy will share insights on how leaders can stay true to themselves while adapting to change, bridging cultural and communication gaps, and building trust across diverse teams. We'll also dive into the role of self-awareness, the courage it takes to step outside your comfort zone, and how leaders can reframe discomfort as a sign of growth and maturity. So let's get started. Andy, thank you so much for being with us today. We are very excited to have you join us.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Well, let's just kick this off. And can you share a little bit about your background and how your personal or professional experiences have influenced the way you think about authenticity in leadership?
Sure. My background is I am a professor. I have a PhD in organizational behavior and psychology. And since I can remember, I've been interested in the challenges that people face in stepping outside their comfort zones. Originally, my work was about stepping outside your cultural comfort zones. And that's what my book, Global Dexterity, was about. And that's what my academic research was about for many, many years. I've started to do a lot of more practical stuff, writing books, writing articles for Harvard Business Review, speaking, training, and all that kind of stuff. And my interests have sort of expanded beyond just the cross-cultural realm to just generally in our lives, especially in our work lives. What are the challenges of stepping outside your comfort zone? How can we understand those better? And how can we help people develop the courage and also the insight to be able to achieve their goals and step outside their comfort zone more successfully?
That's a lot to research there, Andy.
It is, but my goal is to always try to take complex topics and make them simple, not simplistic, but try to retain as much of the complexity, but also make it like super understandable for people. That's always my goal. And so, yeah, I think it's something that people struggle with. I just actually stepped out of an MBA classroom. I teach an MBA program here. And in my class, I'm teaching a class on this topic exactly right now. And we just went through 42 or 3 MBA students' situations where they struggle stepping outside their comfort zone. We just had a discussion about it. In their final project, they need to choose a situation. They need to go off and actually apply what we learned to that situation in the real world. So they have to go to networking events and pitch and promote themselves, even if it feels really uncomfortable for them, things like that. So yeah, I think it's really interesting because these situations are difficult and also really important.
That actually sounds very fascinating. And I'm sure that with 42 different students, you get an array of different situations and how they handle those different situations. So I'm sure that that's fun to grade, especially as a professor.
It's such a meaningful class because, it's like one foot in the one foot in academia, 1 foot in the real world. So it's really fun.
I love it. Well, so from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges leaders face today in building those meaningful connections and leading authentically?
Gosh, it's a big topic. I think that to lead authentically is something that takes a lot of experimentation and thoughtful work to develop a style that is not only successful and effective, but also that works for you and that reflects who you are. And I think a lot of young professionals, I work with a lot of young professionals, step into the workplace and, they don't quite know how they're expected to behave. And maybe they kind of borrow the style of others that they see and maybe try to fake it till they make it, but never quite feel themselves. And I think that, over time, the best leaders find a way to use use their personalities, their true authentic personalities, whether they're introverted or extroverted, whether assertive or not particularly assertive, whether they're shy or whether they're super outgoing, or whatever their style is, to use their style um, as best they can to achieve
Mhm.
key sort of leadership objectives. So, if you look out there in the world, there are a lot of amazing leaders who have very, very different styles. Uh,
Yes.
so the trick is to sort of know yourself, experiment thoughtfully, figure out what works for you, and then sort of hone that over time. That's what I think the goal is, and it's not so easy actually.
No, it's definitely not. Especially you mentioned knowing yourself, that self-awareness piece. A lot of people think, "Oh yeah, I know who I am." But do you? That's a big piece.
It's hard because to know who you are often requires vulnerability and being
Mhm.
open to feedback, and a lot of people aren't. They maybe say they are, but they're quite defensive and they're not open to feedback. And so to grow and learn and develop, you need to somehow have that humility and that insight and that ability to sort of hear from others about how they
Mhm.
see you, and sort of really take it in with the least amount of defensiveness as possible, and that is not easy to do.
Not at all. So really, as leaders, we have to strike that balance between being open and having that authority figure. But like you were saying, it's being vulnerable and maintaining that credibility throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that very often coming up in your class as well?
Well, my classes are so I teach MBA students, so
Okay.
they're not quite leaders. They're aspirational leaders, let's
Okay.
say. I mean, some of them are leaders actually. Some of them are a little older and they have businesses and so on. But so some of them have had leadership experience. A lot of them are aspirational leaders, and I think they're trying to find their way.
Okay.
But I think that I just think that I think it's really hard uh, to 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 show humility as a leader, and to um, be vulnerable, and to be willing to step outside your comfort zone, be willing to change if necessary, certain aspects of your style.
Mhm.
And it's very hard for people, especially sort of the more entrenched they get.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's there is a paradox, because the higher authority you have, oftentimes the less critical, frank feedback you get. So
Yes.
uh, it can be very difficult.
So, what helps a leader decide to really step outside of that comfort zone, especially when working with people who think or communicate differently?
I mean, I think that in anything, psychology teaches us that there's two key factors: ability and motivation.
Oh,
Those are the secrets to success. You need to have the ability to step outside your comfort zone, meaning that um, you need to know maybe what your default style is, know why and how that's not necessarily appropriate or effective for the situation that you're in for achieving your goals. You need to understand the standard that you want to meet, and so on and so forth. Really understand and be able to perform and execute those behaviors in a way that's going to be effective in the situation, despite the fact that it might be uncomfortable for you. That's the ability part. The motivation part is you gotta want to do
yeah.
it. There has to be a reason, because otherwise, why would we do something that's uncomfortable and outside our comfort zones? No, we would tend to avoid that, and actually, people are very good at avoiding it in a variety of ways. We could talk about that, but so you have to. So it's a combination of ability and motivation. And motivation is really the big one. You have to actually deeply, really want to change to be able to do it successfully.
So, then how can leaders kind of refrain some of that discomfort? I mean, instead of just resisting it or avoiding it, and really see it as a sign of maturity. How do you get them outside their comfort zone?
Yeah. So, what I have found in my work is that there's two key strategies that people use when for those who are successful at stepping outside their comfort zone. One is what I call conviction, and one is what I call customization. Conviction is about how you think about it, about the situation, and customization is how you actually do it. Um, Conviction is finding your why, in a sense. It's really discovering and embracing why it matters to you to do something that is outside your comfort zone. Is it gonna help you professionally? Is it going to enable you to achieve goals that you care about? Is it something that you'll feel proud of? Is it actually, I'll give you an example. For me, when I had little kids, my kids are older now, but my wife and I were trying to sort of nudge them outside their comfort zone. And for a little kid, it might be something like, join a group where you don't know someone or something like that. It's important for growth, right? To do that. I was noticing when my kids were little that I would be trying to sort of coax them outside their comfort zone. But I was noticing in my own professional life, maybe I wasn't doing that. And so I started to think to myself, hey, I'm not practicing what I preach. I want to be a role model, even in my own mind. And so that ended up being like a wind at my back and an inspiration for me to step outside my comfort zone in completely different situations than them. But whatever it is, discovering your why, whether it's, whatever it is, and it could be multiple reasons why it matters to you. And you can discover those on your own. You could discover those with a coach. You could discover those with a trusted colleague, whatever it is, but really reflect hard on trying to find why it matters for you. And I find that that's really helpful for people. The other thing is that's conviction. Customization is behavioral. What I mean by that is that stepping outside your comfort zone and acting in a way that sort of is that you're unaccustomed to, but that is necessary in a particular context or situation. I think what's important to remember is that it's rarely the case that there's some very specific narrow thing that you have to do. There's usually leeway. There's a range of ways that you could be effective, even outside your comfort zone. And if you can somehow find a way to customize your behavior, and what I mean by that is find a way to kind of inject part of yourself, like be yourself, but also be effective, like do it your way, your style. And that it's sort of like, it takes a while to kind of develop that. But I think that once people can realize that they can do it their way, and inject a little piece of them into it, it makes it a little bit easier to sort of make that leap.
Absolutely. So it's, why does it matter? And then it's about the behavioral. And really, again, I think it goes back to that self-awareness piece. You have to really understand where you are and how you do specific things. Are you more direct? Are you more reflective with specific things? And then also reading your team as well, right? So maybe you have a team that's a little bit more introverted and you're more extroverted. Do you see that happening? I mean, how does a leader kind of stretch beyond what feels natural to them to connect with their team?
Well, for some leaders, it might be perfectly natural to connect with their team. So it doesn't, it wouldn't be a stretch. That depends on leader and their style and personality and so on. But I think it's not just the team. It's of course the individuals on the team. And sometimes the ways that you, inspire and connect and get to know and develop a rapport and ultimately a relationship with individuals on the team can be quite different with different individuals, right? So as a leader, you can have a repertoire of different styles that you can draw upon to try to create individual relationships with a team, which is different from leading the team as a team in a group setting. And that might be different. That's more about structuring certain types of norms and expectations. And, that's where you're sort of communicating broadly to a broad set of people. But I think a leader also needs and wants to be able to create rapport, relationship, and ultimately trust with individual people as well.
Absolutely. So you mentioned your book, Global Dexterity. So it's that concept of adapting across cultures without losing yourself. So how does that apply in leadership today, especially when you are managing a diverse team?
Well, so we were talking about people stepping outside their comfort zone. Oftentimes, when you're doing global work, your comfort zone can be defined by your personality, but it can also be defined by your cultural background as well.
Mhm.
And so when your cultural background is sort of running against the grain of how you need to act in a particular situation, that can be a challenging situation for a leader. I begin the book Global Dexterity with a story of an American leader in India who needed to be much more assertive and hierarchical and sort of more top down than he was used to. He was an American leader. He was very, very participative, and he
Okay.
believed in a non-hierarchical style of
Yeah.
leadership and involving people at every level and not being the expert and really making, and sort of not putting himself up on a pedestal. That was sort of his American style and his personal style
Mhm.
too. When he went to India, it didn't work at all. They actually, when he was asking people on his team for their input, they interpreted it as the fact that he didn't know what he was doing.
Oh.
Um, and so he needed to find some way ultimately to be able to blend his own participative, more horizontal style with the more top down style that seemed to be respected in that particular Indian context. So that was a challenge for him. And that would be an example where he needed to develop global dexterity to be able to find a solution to be effective in that context. And that's just one example, but you could imagine, hundreds, thousands of examples of leaders, managers, employees, whoever, who need to step outside their cultural comfort zone to be effective in a new situation to achieve their goals, the goals of the organization, and so
Mhm.
on.
Absolutely. So again, it's that leader, their approach for different teams. So how can they tell the difference between authentic adaptation, so adapting to a different culture or a different team, or simply just acting? Because at the end of the day, if we just go and act a specific way instead of being authentic, that can be a very stressful situation.
Yeah, I always say that if it's a short term type of thing where you're popping into a situation and then popping out of it and maybe never being in that situation again, you could probably act. You
Yeah.
could fake it. You could be, they call it deep acting. Or
Okay.
even actually they call it, there's a difference between surface acting and deep acting. Surface acting is really just sort of like playing a role, let's say.
Okay.
Deep acting would be where you start to really embody and feel that role. But if you're just playing a role and just sort of like, superficially adapting to a new culture, in the short term, I don't think that's going to be a problem, because you're not going to be sort of your whole self, your whole identity is not going to be sort of um, affected by that, because you're
Okay.
kind of in and out and you're not going to be there. But that's very different from moving to a new culture,
Yes.
being in a situation that's a global context for a very long time, where you need to find a way that reconciles your own identity
Mhm.
alongside this new way that you have to act. You can't just sort of fake it and pretend. I think if it's going to be more of a long term type of thing, because I think it won't be sustainable. What will happen is you'll start to feel inauthentic. You'll feel anxious. You'll feel a level of performance anxiety. You'll feel maybe even resentful of the fact that you have to fake it in this way. And those negative feelings will kind of leak. Psychologists talk about
Yeah.
leaking into your behavior, and it will make it very uncomfortable and difficult. You probably won't even be that effective. So I think I think the big difference is short term, long term on that one.
Okay. So really, what would you say that first step is to bridge that gap to build trust and obviously gain performance on a team that is culturally or even temperamentally different than you? Because maybe we're not working globally, but even internally. So culturally versus temperamentally, what's the first step to build that trust?
Well, I think the first step. So put it this way: the first step that I would take if I were a leader would be to actually one on one try to get to know and discover some commonality among people who might, on the surface, be quite different from you.
Okay.
Uh, Through conversation, initial small talk, but more than small talk, you can often find ways to see if you have commonalities, which can start to create sort of the basis for a relationship, and then you can kind of go from there. I remember as you were talking, I was just thinking of the situation that I was in, not as a leader, but some of the lessons are applicable. I think I was doing executive education teaching, which is basically like teaching executives, and it was a Korean company. They were here in Boston. They sent a group of their executives here in Boston, young executives. I mean, they're executives, but to be honest, they're probably in their mid 30s, maybe late 30s, something like that. I remember we did a session in the morning, and then it was lunchtime. I was the only non-Korean there. I was the teacher, and so we got our food and in the lunchroom, and there were no places to sit except for one table where there was a guy who was basically asleep. He was like lying, his head was on the table, and he was asleep. And so like that was the only place I could sit. That was the only place to sit. So I sat there, and then the guy eventually he wakes up when I put my tray down, and he says, "Oh, I'm so sorry." He was in the session, of course, earlier, and he said to me something like, "Yeah, I'm so sorry." I said, "No problem, no problem." It sounds like maybe I made a joke about how maybe my session was really boring and put him to sleep. But what he said is, he said no. He said that he's a young father. He is a father of very young children, and at home he never has a chance to sleep. And like literally, this is like the only time he's gotten decent sleep since he's been away. And it was funny because at that point in time, my kids were of a similar age, and I could really identify with that. And we started just having a little conversation about being a parent, and it was interesting because I would have thought there was nothing we had in common. He was this Korean engineer. At this company, and he was doing something that I just didn't really even understand. I was talking about leadership and culture, but his actual job, I had no idea. But we found this connection, and there was a sense. It was like the beginnings of a potential relationship, and I think that the reason that comes to mind is that that's something that a leader can do with individual members on the team, even if they ostensibly have nothing in common. Maybe at first, maybe they're of a totally different age or generation or background or whatever, but you can often find common interests, and those are usually great building blocks for a potential relationship.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel like finding those common grounds, it kind of helps build like psychological safety and allows you to still stay true to yourself, even when there are differences?
I think once you feel that you have a connection with someone, that you have true rapport with someone, I think you can be more authentic. And that might be different than psychological safety. Psychological safety really is about, in a team context, people feeling safe to admit mistakes.
Okay.
I do feel that having rapport, having a relationship with people on your team as a leader that you've developed, I do think that contributes to a climate where people feel comfortable, admitting flaws, admitting mistakes, and so on. So I think the two are connected.
It's one of those things where you connect and then you can communicate, and that builds trust on a team.
Yeah, and it can grow over time, or not,
Yeah.
depending, if a leader doesn't show much interest, if you feel excluded, if there's sort of as they would say, as my kids would say, a negative vibe.
Okay.
Then what's going to happen is, then when there are some ambiguous situations, or situations where you think someone might have said something or done something, you won't give someone the benefit of the doubt if it's not built upon a sort of a bedrock of that sense of rapport and trust, right? Because that's when teams can disintegrate, when people can question others' motivations, why they said that or why they did that. But if you have a sense of rapport and trust that you've built, that little beginnings of a relationship, and you have that positive connection, I think people are much more willing to give others the benefit of the doubt, and that sort of can bolster a team as opposed to cause a team to sort of disintegrate in some way.
Yeah. Well, Andy, last question. if there is one mindset shift that every leader could make tomorrow to become more authentic, what would it be?
Mindset shift that leader could do tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
to become more authentic.
Yes.
Um, well, I think it depends on the context. So, I think for leaders, I think trying to remember what it was like to be a young professional,
Yeah.
especially if you're leading a team of young professionals, to try to really remember what it felt like, what it was like, um, you know, how uncomfortable it might have been to speak up at a meeting, how scared they might have been about about saying the wrong thing, or and to try to really step into the shoes empathically of the people that you're working with, which is not an easy thing to do. Um, I think that that's one step that people could take, because once you can start to understand people a little bit better from in terms of who they are, and what conversations going on in their minds, I think then that sort of sets the stage for a much more authentic connection, authentic relationship. These things are not easy to do.
Right.
It's not usually on people's minds. People are usually focused on the list of to dos, on
Yeah.
the agenda for the meeting, on the KPI, like all the KPIs, the whatever's going on from a business context. And I think some of these softer skills kind of fall by the wayside, and unfortunately, those are the things that actually can get in the way of successful teamwork.
Yeah. So put yourself in their shoes and remember to be empathetic.
I think so, which is sort of it sounds a little trite, but I think it's really true. And it's actually not an easy skill to do.
Yeah. Well, that is a wrap on today's episode of Working Progress. A big thank you to you, Andy, for sharing your insights and your experience on what it truly means to lead authentically in an uncertain world. If you found today's conversation valuable, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with a fellow colleague or leader. Your support continues to help us bring these powerful conversations to life. And remember, authentic leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about the courage to adapt, the self-awareness to grow, and the humility to connect across differences. As always, thank you for listening. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making progress. Take care, everyone.